Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. Is that okay at the back? Yeah? Thank you. So first of all, I really appreciate this invitation to be here in Kelowna, especially in support of this wonderful organization, the Ozanam Men's Center, a much needed facility. But what do I want to talk to you about? I think what I've been trying to figure out all my life is two questions. Why do people suffer? Why do we impose suffering on ourselves and on other people? But more fundamentally, what makes us tick? Just what does it mean to be a human being? Now, that's not the kind of stuff you talk about in medical school. In medical school, you talk about organs and systems and chemistry and physiology and biology and biochemistry and pathology and diseases. But we never talk about the human being in which those processes take place and in whom health or disease manifests itself. So we never actually talk about what it means to be a human being. It's as if people just had separate organs, a heart or guts or a liver or a brain or an immune system or kidney. And for every one of those organs, there's a specialist that knows the pathology of that particular organ, but doesn't know anything about the human being in which that organ resides. And so we separate the body into these different parts. And this is in the medical mind, but also in the Western mind in general. And we separate the mind from the body, and we separate the individual from the environment. So I'm going to ask you a question. So in the last 5 years, if you've been to a cardiologist, immunologist, rheumatologist, respirologist, gastroenterologist, dermatologist, any kind of an ologist, just put your hand up, would you? Okay, well, a lot of sick people here. Okay. Now, put your hand up again if they ask you about any trauma in your childhood. Okay, I see one, maybe two, three hands. Put your hand up if they ask you about your relationship with your spouse and your friends. Yeah, one person. Two people, thank you. And maybe a few more because I can't quite see at the back. Put your hand up if they ask you about how you feel towards yourself as a human being, whether you like yourself or whether you don't. You got a good doctor, keep them. These questions that they didn't ask, maybe a more general one. Put your hand up if they ask you about stress in your life. A few more hands, but very few. Those questions that they didn't ask you, I maintain, had everything to do why you were at the doctor's in the first place. And I'm not just giving my opinion here. What's frustrating about all this, I'm telling you what science has taught us for the last 150 years. Nothing I'm going to say to you tonight, I cannot document in scientific studies. So my critique of the Western medical model is not that it's too scientific, is that it's not scientific enough. It excludes whole swaths of science that doesn't fit in with its ideology. In 1870, there was a French neurologist called Jean Martin Charcot, neurologist, psychiatrist. He first described multiple sclerosis. And he said, this is a disease rooted in loss and grief and vexation, he said. In other words, trauma and stress. In the 1890s, the great Canadian physician, Sir William Osler, whose name is still revered in Canadian medical history, and is considered to be possibly the greatest medical teacher of all time. He said that rheumatoid arthritis was rooted in stress. 1870, a great British surgeon, James Paget, whose name is still revered in medical circles, said that breast cancer had a lot to do with a woman's emotional states. Now these pioneers, they didn't have any science to back it up because the science didn't yet exist. They just saw what they saw. Since then, whether you look at breast cancer, whether you look at multiple sclerosis, whether you look at rheumatoid arthritis, there's been oodles of research linking these conditions to stress and trauma. And not only are the links established, even the physiology of how these emotional factors affect the physiology of the body, they've been worked out minutely. And the average medical student doesn't get a single lecture on this. To this day at UBC, or almost anywhere. This center, on behalf of whom I'm speaking tonight, deals with addictions. There's a British psychologist, a member of the British Academy, Richard Bentall, who said that the link between childhood adversity, which is to say trauma, and adult mental health conditions is as clearly established as the link between smoking and lung cancer. The average medical student does not get a single lecture on trauma. So I may as well entitle tonight's talk, Everything They Didn't Teach Me in Medical School. Which is not to say that I didn't learn good stuff. I mean, Western medicine is amazing in its achievements, what it can diagnose and sometimes often cure technologically, surgically, in so many ways. It's miraculous. But it's miraculous within a very narrow range. And when it comes to chronic conditions of mind and body, it's pretty clueless for the most part. Why? Because they don't look at the science of the unity of everything. Now, the idea that everything is united is not a new idea. By the way, in 1939, there was a doctor at Harvard University. His name was Dr. Soma Weiss. He was a Hungarian like myself, but he was teaching at Harvard. And his name is so venerated that to this day, they have a research day in his honor at Harvard. And here's what he said at a very famous lecture to a medical school class in 1939. He said that social and psychic or psychological factors play a role in every disease, but in many conditions they represent the dominant influences. He said in 1939. He also said that mental factors represent as active a force in the treatment of patients as chemical and physical agents. He knew what he was talking about, even if he didn't have the science that we have today to back him up. Now, here's the deal. This article, this lecture that he gave, was subsequently reprinted in the Journal of the American Medical Association, you know, the chief journal of American physicians, in 1940. Here's the punchline. 5 years ago, as I was writing this book, I interviewed a psychiatrist at Harvard, a very well-known psychiatrist. His name is Dr. Jeff Rediger. He heads one of the departments at McLean's Hospital at Harvard. And he said that to this day, to talk about mind-body medicine is to risk your career at Harvard. This is 80 years after Semmelweis made this observation that was reprinted in the Journal of Medical Association. In 1977, there was a very famous American physician, psychiatrist, George Engel, and he said the following. He said that the crippling flaw in modern medicine is that it does not include the patient and his attributes as a person. Yet the everyday work of the physician is the prime object of study is a person. So he called for what he termed a biopsychosocial view of health, which simply means that the biology of human beings cannot be separated from their psychology and from their social relationships. Which means that when we're looking at an illness in a person, we're not just looking at an illness in a particular part of the body, whether it's the brain or the heart or the lungs or kidneys or whatever, the intestines, the skin. We're actually looking at the emotional life of that person. And of course, people's emotional lives don't take place in a vacuum. They take place in the context of social relationships, as I will tell you, from the moment that we're conceived. Which means that when we're diagnosing an organ in a person, we're actually looking at a life in a culture. This is not new information. The fact that everything is interconnected has been a fundamental teaching of traditional cultures for thousands of years, and certainly is part of the medicinal traditions of indigenous cultures, including here in Canada. So a friend of mine, a doctor, a physician, trained as a psychiatrist as well, I think, Louis Mel Madrona, who is of part Sioux, Lakota Sioux origin, told me that in his tradition, the Lakota tradition, when somebody gets sick, the community kind of says, you know, thank you. Your illness is manifesting something about our whole community. So your healing is our healing. You're just the sensitive one. You're the canary in the mine. So this interconnectivity of everything is not some major scientific breakthrough. It's what people have always known. It's more like we've forgotten it. In the West, we've forgotten it. But scientifically, we've demonstrated it. The Buddha, you know, in ancient India, 2,700 years ago, said, contemplate the nature of interconnected co-arising during every moment. In other words, everything co-arises, everything arises in unity with everything else. So he says, when you look at a leaf or a raindrop, meditate on the conditions, near and distant, that have contributed to the presence of that leaf or raindrop. Now, when you think of a leaf, you can just see it. I mean, our ordinary tendency is to see it as an isolated object, right? Hanging on a tree. Is it? It contains the sun, for God's sakes. Photosynthesis, without which it wouldn't be green. It synthesizes light. It contains the sunlight. It contains the earth, from which the minerals are derived that make up the substance of the leaf. You know, it contains the sky, the rain, the water. So in that leaf, there's the whole world. The leaf might also reflect the activity of humans or animals. And in the same way, we human beings are part of that whole big thing. And you can't disconnect these parts of ourselves. And so, when I first became interested, well, I'll tell you my route to all this. So in medical school, I learned a lot of good stuff, physiology and, you know, pathology and so on. But nobody taught me about the human being. But in family practice, you can't help but notice things if your eyes are open. And as a family physician, you do have an advantage over the specialists. They know a lot more about some particular organ than you ever will, and its treatment when pathology shows up, but they don't know the person. Whereas I got to see people before they got sick. I got to see them in the context of their families. I got to see them in the context of their multi-generational family histories. And I began to make certain connections. And I'll tell you a story. When I was writing my book, When the Body Says No, I was researching the connection between stress and cancer. So I went to the BC Cancer Agency office at 10th and Willow in Vancouver. I spoke to the head of the psychology department, and I said, I'm looking for the link between stress and cancer. She said, we don't believe there's any such link. I went to the library where I found 10,000 articles. I don't know, 10,000, maybe only 500, I don't know. Connecting the link between stress and cancer. It had been researched and published. Shocking, the gap between practice and science. So I began to notice that people who got sick and who didn't, there were certain characteristics. Now let me tell you something, and this is maybe the fundamental theme of my talk tonight. There was a book written 13 years ago or so by an Australian nurse. It's called The 5 Top Regrets of Dying People. Now this nurse worked in palliative care, looking after terminally ill people, which is what I did for 7 years. For 7 years, while I was in family practice, but I was also the coordinator of the palliative care unit at Vancouver Hospital, working with dying people. And you learn a lot about people when they're dying, if you listen to them. And these are people who are dying before their time. They're not in old age, but they're dying of cancer and other chronic illnesses. So this nurse found what I often found. You know what the top regret of dying people is? That they weren't themselves. That they tried to fit in with other people's expectations, that they suppressed who they were for the sake of being accepted by others. So they weren't their genuine self. That's the top regret of people who die before their time. What I can tell you is that not only is that the top regret, but that suppression of the self is actually a significant cause of illness. It's why they were dying. And I'll say something more about that later. So I began to notice these patterns of who got sick and who didn't. And then I had to deal with my own stuff because I was in my 40s, I had 3 kids. They were not happy. My marriage was very stressed. And at a certain point, I had to start asking, well, what's going on here? And I was a very successful doctor. You know, I was busy and always in demand, and people were very grateful, but I was a workaholic. I wanted, I wouldn't say no to anything. It doesn't matter how many patients I had, I always would take on more. Doesn't matter how many pregnant women I was already looking after, I'd take on one more if they wanted to come to me. I couldn't say no. So I had to start asking myself, well, what's going on here? And what's going on with my kids? And then, in my mid-50s, while I was working at palliative care, I discovered ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADD, whatever you want to call it. The social worker on the unit, Betsy Jo, her name was, came to me and said, hey, Gabor, can we have coffee? And I said, sure, let's have coffee. They're both very hyper people. And she told me she's just been diagnosed. And with adult ADD, which I'd never heard anything about. And 5 minutes into the conversation, I realized why it was with me that she had asked to have coffee with. So I self-diagnosed and I saw a psychiatrist and they agreed and so on. But I never bought into the idea, which is the major medical position still now, that this is some kind of a genetic brain disease. I just didn't buy it. I didn't have any science to back up my suspicion, but I just didn't buy it. And here's why not. Because the absent-mindedness, the tuning out that I was so accustomed to, I realized was not a disease, genetic or otherwise. What was it? If I were to stress any of you right now, you'd have 3 healthy options. First thing is you could ask for help. There's hundreds of people here. If I was bugging you, you could ask for help. Or you could stand up and tell me to back off. You could fight. Or you could leave. So help, which is what children do first. Young animals, they run to the parent. Or you fight back, or you escape. What if you can't? What if I was stressing you, putting you under great strain, but you couldn't either stand up and defend yourself, escape, or ask for help? Then your brain would tune out as a way of protecting you from the stress. So it's just a defense mechanism. And that's what I knew, that's what I understood. And when I thought about my own infancy, and I'm not going to go into details here, but I was a Jewish infant under the Nazi occupation of Hungary. I spent my first year in that very threatening, dire, wartime environment. My mother was a very stressed woman, and terrified actually, as you can imagine. Grief-stricken, because her parents had died in Auschwitz and so on. What do you think her states of mind was? Her states of mind was one of terror, fear, and stress. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to read you a quote here. The child is very open and can feel the pain and suffering going on in its immediate environment. The child is aware of its own body and can also feel the tension, rigidity, and pain in the body of the mother of anyone else he is with. If the mother is suffering, the baby suffers too. The pain never gets discharged. So what do I do with that as a 1-year-old? Or as an 11-month-old, as a 6-month-old? I tune out. But when am I tuning out? When my brain is developing. And nobody ever taught me about brain development either in medical school. They still don't. But let me read you something about that. In case you're wondering why I'm wandering all over the place, from illnesses to ADHD to this, believe me, it'll all hang together for you. But then I finish. Okay. But anyway, here's how the brain develops. Because what I'm talking about, people, here is what creates us as human beings. How do we get to be who we are? What makes us believe what we believe? What makes us act what we react? What makes us sick? What keeps us healthy? And to understand all that, you have to understand the context in which human beings develop. If you were a gardener, for God's sakes, and the plant wasn't growing as fast as you wanted it to, you could go out there and yell at it, "Grow up already!" Well, good luck with that one. Or you could ask yourself, what conditions does it require for healthy development? And that's all I'm talking about. And if those conditions in the early years are not right, then all kinds of stuff, excuse me, all kinds of stuff will follow later on. So how does the brain develop? See, when we talk about brain diseases, mental health conditions, addictions, as diseases of the brain, maybe not. Maybe they're the outcomes of stuff that happened to the brain as it was developing. Maybe they're not genetic at all. In fact, there is no proof than any mental health condition is genetically determined. There's no gene that if you have it, you're going to have this mental health condition or that. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, psychosis, whatever. Addiction. No proof whatsoever. There's no group of genes that if you have them, you're going to get this disease or that disease or that disease. Nobody's ever found any such genes. Whenever they think they did, front page newspaper reports, when 2 years later they have to revoke the findings because they weren't accurate, that's in the back page of the newspaper. So the population believes that everything is genetic, whereas there's very few genetic diseases. There are some. If you have a certain gene, you might get a certain disease. For example, there's a disease called muscular dystrophy. If you have the gene, you'll have the disease. Very rare. It's in my family. My mother had the gene. She died with it. My aunt had it. Same thing. But those diseases are very rare. So, the brain. This is an article from a very obscure university, Harvard University, published in a back page medical journal called Pediatrics, the official journal of the American Pediatric Academy. That's why most doctors don't know about this stuff, because it's published in the major journals. And I'm not critical of my colleague physicians. They're very dedicated people and they do their best. But they're working in a scientific vacuum because of what they're not taught. So, the brain. The architecture of the brain is constructed through an ongoing process that begins before birth. Now, what does that mean? It means that already what happens in the uterus is shaping the development of the brain. Now, let me ask you another question here. How many of you here have been pregnant and been to a doctor's office? Just raise your hand, would you? Okay. I'm sure that when you visited the physician, you were asked about your diet, perhaps, and you were weighed, and they measured your blood pressure, they took blood tests, ultrasounds. How many were you asked about your emotional state? Very few hands. I'm glad, but a small minority. And yet the emotional states of the mother have a significant effect on the infant, as we know from all kinds of scientific studies. Because when a woman is stressed, for example, the stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, go through to the baby. That affects the baby's brain development. When the mother is stressed, the baby's heart rate is different. We've seen that on heart rate studies. When women are stressed or traumatized during pregnancy, that changes the genetic functioning of their infants. We know that too. So, go back to the brain. But I've lost it. Oh, no, here it is. Okay. The architecture of the brain is constructed to an ongoing process that begins before birth, continues into adulthood, and establishes either a sturdy or a fragile foundation for all the health, learning, and behavior that follow. Not some of the health, learning, all the health. The foundations are established during the period of brain development, from in utero until adulthood. The interactions of genes and experiences literally shapes the circuitry of the developing brain. In other words, the physiological circuitry, the chemistry of the brain, the connectivity of the brain, which systems develop and how well, is determined by the actions of the environment on your genes. And is critically influenced by the mutual responsiveness of adult-child relationships, particularly in early childhood years. In other words, the most important influence on the brain development of the child is the quality of the relationship with the nurturing adult. And I'm not talking about how much the parents love their kids, because they do. I mean, I remember having oceanic love for my children when they were asleep. And you know the feeling. Next morning, So we're not talking about how much love the parent feels for the child. I'm talking about to what degree is the parent capable of being emotionally present for the child. Because I'll talk to you about the needs of the child in a moment. But when parents are stressed, economically, or politically, or they're carrying their own trauma that haven't worked out yet, or the parental relationship is stressed, and there's a lot of tension in the home, the kids pick up on that. You want to know how you can figure out if a marriage is troubled or not? You can do two things. You can interview the parents, or you can measure the stress hormone level in the urine of the child. Because the children are affected by the parent's stress. And that has an impact on their physiology, because it's all one, you see. So, if I can explain my tuning out by the stress that my mother was under, and then therefore I was under, and that then being wired into my brain, because that's when my brain was developing, I can also explain my workaholism that way. Because why was I a workaholic? Now look, and I think this is true for a lot of people. Whatever we do, whatever decision we make, whatever action we undertake, we usually have many reasons. We think we know the reason, but what we think is only part of the reason. It may be a valid part of the reason, but it's only a part of the reason. So look, when I went to medical school, I genuinely wanted a profession where I could really help people. That was a calling that I had. A lot of doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, other helpers have that kind of calling. That's genuine, authentic, and to be respected, I think. But there was something else. There was another motive, which was more selfish, perhaps, but, I wanted to make a good living. I want to feel economically secure. That's okay. But there was something I didn't know. I needed to feel wanted. I needed to feel important. Why? Because I didn't. Why didn't I? Because children are narcissistic. And by narcissism, I don't mean a pathology or anything negative. I mean, they take everything personally. So when my mother was stressed, guess whose fault that was in my own mind? Let me tell you a story that some of you might find a bit strange, but that's okay. Sometimes I worked with psychedelics. Some of you know that I worked with psychedelics for the last 12, 13 years. They're a useful healing modality in many cases. They're no panacea. They're not for everybody, and then they're not going to save the world, but they can be useful. And I've worked with them both as a healer and also as a client. So about 7, 8 years ago, I was in San Francisco in a mushroom session. I was the client. I'd taken the psilocybin, the magic mushroom, 2 grams is the usual dose. I was lying on a mat on the floor in the office of the therapist. She was sitting there next to me, a woman in her 50s. I knew exactly where I was. I was in this therapist's office. I knew what I'd done. I'd taken mushroom to have a healing experience. She was the therapist, and I knew what my name was and who I was in the world. I wasn't hallucinating, but I had a kind of a double consciousness, because at the same time, under the influence of the psychedelic, I experienced myself as a 1-year-old baby. And this woman was my therapist. Sorry, this therapist was my mother. And I started crying. And I said to her, I'm so sorry I've made your life so difficult. At 1 year of age, I took on that I'm the one who made my mother's life difficult. That's what children do automatically. That's a big burden. That's a big burden. And when I was 11 months of age, my mother gave me to a total stranger in the street. a Christian woman. That's all she could do to save my life, because she couldn't keep me alive anymore. She couldn't even know if she would live another day. So I didn't see my mom for 5 or 6 weeks. Well, what do I conclude from that? That I'm not lovable. That's the trauma. So I talked to you about trauma. Trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is not that I was separated from my mother and then she gave me to a stranger. That wasn't the trauma. That was a traumatic event. Trauma means wound. And the wound happens inside you. So trauma is not the blow on the head. Trauma is the concussion. Trauma is not the car accident. It's the broken leg is the trauma. That's the wound. And the psyche, the mind, can be wounded as much as the body can be. So trauma is this wound. And the wound is, I'm not lovable, I'm not wanted. No, if you're not lovable, if you're not wanted, you know what you do? You go to medical school. Because now they're going to want you all the time. When they're born, they want you. When they're dying, they want you. And every minute in between, they're in trouble. They're going to call you on the beeper, and boy, am I important. That's not a calling. That's being driven. It's not the same thing. When you're called, you can answer the call or not. It's conscious. Being driven is unconscious. You're like a leaf in the wind. So I'm working too much. I'm not at home for my kids. What message do they get? That they're not wanted. Because if Daddy wanted them, he'd be around with them. So we pass on our traumas unwittingly, despite the love that we have, until we work them out. There's one more thing. I opened this book, The Myth of Normal, with an episode, if you read the book, you know the story, of me arriving home from a speaking trip when I was young and stupid, maybe 6 years ago when I was 74, okay? And the trip had gone very well, and I was very happy, and I even got bumped up to first class by Air Canada. So I was just feeling peachy keen until I landed at Vancouver Airport, and I got a text from my wife who was supposed to pick me up, and she says, I haven't left home yet, do you still want me to come? And I go into a rage. All my joy disappears, and I'm just this, I text back, never mind. And you have to picture the indignity of this. I had to take a taxi home, 15 minutes in a taxi, who can stand it, Anyway, and when I get home, I'm not even looking at her. And for a whole day, I barely grunted at her. I was in withdrawal, in a rageful withdrawal, until she finally said, knock it off already. So I did. But that was progress, because years before, it might have taken me weeks to knock it off. Now, what was going on? What was going on is that I perceived myself as abandoned and unloved. That wasn't what happened. What happened was my wife is a painter. She's an artist, and when she's painting, nothing else exists. That's just what artists do. I've only known this for 50 years. But what got triggered was the memory of being abandoned by my mother. Even that was an abandonment, but that's the only way I could perceive it and interpret it. And when I saw my mom again, after 5 or 6 weeks of separation, she told me, you wouldn't even look at me for several days. Which is a defense mechanism of the brain. It says, you were so hurt when you were abandoned that you never open yourself up again. You'll never make yourself so vulnerable again. So you're going to withdraw. Now, I bet there's a lot of people in this room who are in relationships, and when there's a problem, when you feel some pain, you probably withdraw in the same sullen way that I did. How many of you recognize that in yourself? Yeah, quite a few. Well, what you're talking about is your early childhood history. I don't recall being separated from my mother, but I remember it. There's a significant difference. Recall means you can call back. You can recall what you did last night, what you did at age 5 at a party. But that's only one kind of memory. There's another kind of memory that has no conscious, episodic recall associated with it. It's just the imprint of emotional experiences ingrained in your brain. And the part of the brain that recalls doesn't develop till about 3 years of age or later. But the part of the brain that remembers the emotional imprint, that's there right from birth. So when something happens today that vaguely resembles what happened way back then when you were a helpless child, all those emotions come flooding in. And that's another aspect of trauma. First of all, it's not the event that happens to you, it's the wound that you sustained, in my case, the belief that I wasn't lovable. Another aspect of trauma is that it makes us hard to be in the present moment because we're always reacting to the past. We have this word that we use called being triggered, trigger. Well, that's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Language is really interesting. I did used to be an English teacher before I went to medical school. I taught high school for 3 years. I decided that was way too stressful, so why don't I go work in the downtown east side instead, you know? Trigger means, when you look at the metaphor of a trigger, how big a part of the weapon is the trigger? Very small. There has to be ammunition there and an explosive charge. So when you get triggered, guess what? The ammunition and the explosive charge that you've been carrying all of a sudden sets off. Now you can focus on the trigger. You triggered me, don't trigger me. Or you could more usefully examine, what's the explosive charge inside me? What's the ammunition? What's being triggered here? Well, that's the trauma showing up. Now I'm going to read you, I talked to you about this regret, this top 5 regret of dying people, and the top one being that they weren't themselves. Now let me talk to you now a little bit about how that leads to wellness. And this is not theoretical, or not purely theoretical, because I can tell you, lots of people, when they get sick, if they allow the disease to wake them up, they actually have a much better chance of healing. I can give you many examples of that. Not only can I give you many examples of it, many examples have been researched and published. So it's not just a matter of, now I'm not promising a magical cure to anybody. I'm just saying that the possibility of healing really opens up for a lot of people, especially in chronic conditions, where you know, I could show you some slides. I had this on my computer. I hadn't cooked it up. A young woman who came to a talk I gave in London, England 5 years ago, and she had this condition called lupus. It's an autoimmune disease where the immune system attacks the body itself. It's like if the Canadian Army invaded Canada. The immune system meant to protect you attacks you instead. Rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, colitis, Crohn's disease, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, any number of conditions are autoimmune diseases. So she had this one called lupus. And by the way, women have 80% of autoimmune disease for reasons I'll touch upon in a moment, if I remember. This young woman was diagnosed with lupus. Her face was red. She had this butterfly rash. It's called the butterfly rash because it covers her cheeks, and then there's a bridge here like a butterfly's body, butterfly rash. And her fingers were white, about as yellow as this paper here, because the blood supply had been constricted to her fingers. She was told by the doctors, you got this disease, we don't know what causes it, you're going to have it for the rest of your life, it's going to get worse, and the best we can give you is give you medications. I could show you what she looks like today. She sent me photographs a year ago. Face looks beautiful, no rash, fingers are pink as anything, no medication, no disease, no nothing. Why? Because she realized the emotional factors in her life that created the ground for the disease. And the biggest ground was that she was not in contact with herself, not in touch with herself. She had disconnected from herself, which is another aspect of trauma. We disconnect from our bodies, our emotions. Let me ask you another question with a show of hands. If you've had the following experience, that you've had a strong gut feeling about something, and you ignored it, and you were sorry afterwards, just raise your hand, would you? Okay, well, just about everybody here. You just told me the story of your childhoods, whether you realize it or not. Have you ever met, has anybody ever met, a one-day-old baby not in touch with their gut feelings? That's all they have. Why do we get disconnected? Why do we don't trust them? Why don't we listen to them? And gut feelings are not luxuries. I'll talk to you about that in a moment. When I mentioned to you that there were certain patterns that I noticed in people who got sick, I will, if I can, read you some materials here. Okay, let's just try this. Okay. I'm sorry, let's try this one more time. Doesn't want to give it to me. All right, well, what these were clippings from a newspaper, the Globe and Mail, for which I used to write a medical column. And if I don't find it, I can read it. And I'm not finding it, so that's okay. I'm not going to keep looking. So, yeah, I know, I did find it. How about that? So, this is an article written by a woman just diagnosed with breast cancer. Remember I said there's all kinds of research showing the relationship between breast cancer and emotional factors? She's just been diagnosed, and she wrote the article in the first person. The Globe and Mail's got a column written by people in the first person. And her doctor's name is Harold, and her husband's name is Hai. And she says, Harold tells me that now Hai's first wife died of breast cancer. Now Donna, the second wife, is diagnosed with the same thing. Harold tells me that the lump is small and most assuredly not in my lymph nodes, unlike that of Hai's first wife, whose cancer had spread everywhere by the time they found it. You're not going to die, he reassures me. But I'm worried about Hai, I say. I won't have the strength to support him. Now what's wrong with this picture? She's the one diagnosed with a potentially fatal illness, no matter what the doctor says. And her first and automatic thought is, how will I look after my husband? She's the one who's going to have to go through radiation, maybe surgery, chemotherapy. How will I support my husband? So this automatic regard, compulsive concern with the emotional needs of others while ignoring your own, is a major risk factor for illness. And again, what I'm telling you here is, when I first noticed these things, I just thought I was seeing things. Turns out other doctors had seen it, had researched it, and found the same thing, just that nobody ever told me about that. The second, these are the other three I'll read you are obituaries, and which are fascinating, because very often what people praise in the prematurely deceased is precisely what caused their death, but they don't realize it. So here's a doctor who, age 55, died of cancer in Toronto. Never for a day did he contemplate giving up the work he so loved at Toronto's Sick Children's Hospital. He carried on with his duties throughout his year-long battle with cancer, stopping only a few days before he died. Now, a friend of yours got diagnosed with cancer, go back to work. Don't take any rest, don't look after yourself, nothing, just keep working until you drop. So this automatic and rigid concern with duty, role, and responsibility rather than the needs of the authentic self That's another risk factor for illness. And I can certainly relate to that one. I talked to you about my workaholism. The third characteristic is illustrated by this obituary written by a grateful husband whose wife died of breast cancer, again at age 55. And the husband writes, in her entire life, she never got into a fight with anyone. The worst you could say was phooey or something else along those lines. She had no ego. She just blended in with the environment in an unassuming manner. Now, I'm sure many of you here who are married, sometimes you wish that your partner would blend in with the environment in an unassuming manner, but not if they want to stay healthy, because what's being described here is the repression of healthy anger, and let me tell you, there's such a thing as healthy anger. It's a boundary defense. If I were to tread on your toes, you better get angry with me. Get out. This is my space. Get out. That's healthy anger. I'm not talking about rage. That's unhealthy anger. But healthy anger, we have a circuitry in our brain for anger. Nature gave it to us for a good reason. Anger is a boundary defense. What is the immune system? It's a boundary defense. Anger keeps out what you don't want. The immune system keeps out what's unhealthy. Because physiologically, we now know that the immune system, the emotional system, the nervous system, and the hormonal apparatus are not separate functions at all. They're one system. Physiologically, they're one system. So when you're pushed on one aspect of it, you're pushing down the other. When you're repressing your healthy anger, not expressing how you feel, you're also affecting your immune system, which can result in autoimmune disease or malignancy. Now, why do women get more autoimmune disease? In this society, well, let me read you one more obituary and then I'll come back to that question. So, in this case, you have to believe me, I didn't make this one up. This is from the Globe and Mail obituary section. And this is a doctor at age 72 who died of cancer in Ottawa. And the obituary said, Sidney and his mother had an incredibly special relationship, a bond that was apparent in all aspects of their lives until her death. As a married man with young children, Sidney made a point to have dinner with his parents every day as his wife Rosalind and their four kids waited for him at home. He would walk in, greeted by yet another dinner to eat and to enjoy. Never wanting to disappoint either woman in his life, Sidney kept having 2 dinners a day for years until gradual weight gain began to raise suspicions. This guy suffered from 2 fatal beliefs. One, he's responsible for other people feel. You're not responsible for anybody feels. You're responsible for how you act and how you speak, but not for how they feel, unless you're a parent with small kids. Okay? And the second fatal belief was he was never disappoint anybody. Now, I'm not going to go into the science of it. There's a chapter on it in the book. I mean, I talk about it in the book When the Body Says No, Myth and Normal. But why do women get more autoimmune disease? And why do indigenous women get even more autoimmune disease? Indigenous people in Canada used to have no autoimmune disease at all prior to colonization. It's got nothing to do with genetics. It's got to do with stress and trauma. An indigenous woman today in Canada has 6 times the rate of rheumatoid arthritis than other people. If you're indigenous, your rate is 3 times as high. If you're a woman and indigenous, 6 times as high. Well, why? Suppression. And in this culture, which is the gender that's generally expected to be nice, not to be angry, to look after the emotional needs of others, ignoring their own, feel responsible for other people feel and not disappoint anybody. Women. That's why women are more prone to autoimmune disease. Which also means that healing, if you actually start knowing what you feel and getting connected to yourself and expressing it and saying no, you can actually do a lot of healing. I can give you lots of examples of that. The disease can actually teach you. And I've talked to many people who said that this disease has been my greatest teacher. You all know the singer Sheryl Crow, I imagine. And Sheryl Crow said she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she said, surviving breast cancer redefined who I am and how I am. Until then, I'd spent a lifetime being a caretaker for everyone around me. From then, I started to put myself first. I used to have a voice in my head, at the back of my head, telling me that whatever I did wasn't good enough. Now finally, I've silenced those voices. So she allowed the disease to teach her. Why do people behave that way? Not deliberately. Here's the problem with us as human beings. Here's the problem. We think we're free. But many of the decisions and reactions and behaviors that we pursue are actually determined by what we're not conscious of or unconscious. And basically the unconscious pulls our strings. We're like puppets on a string. When I was a workaholic doctor, I was a puppet on a string. You got to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. So what happens? Children have two fundamental needs. Well, they have several fundamental needs. I'll say something about them in a minute. But we do have the need to be attached to. Attachment means our connection with somebody else. Why do infants have a need to attach? Because otherwise they die. So mammalian creatures, whether they're rats or horses or whales or elephants, wolves, they're wired to attach. Our brains are wired to love and to be loved, to be cared for. We have a circuitry for anger. We all have a circuitry for caring. Because without that, there's no mammalian life, especially in the human life, because we're immature and dependent for much longer than other animals are. So that's one need we have, is for attachment, that connection. And that's a powerful need that we have all our lives, but it's never more imperative than in early childhood. But we have another need, authenticity. Auto, the self, being connected to our gut feelings, knowing what we feel, and being able to act on what we feel if necessary. Why is that necessary? We grew up, we evolved out there in nature until our species, Homo sapiens, has been on the earth for something like 200,000 years. A million years before then, there were other humanoid creatures. All that time, we lived out in nature until about 10, 15,000 years ago. And for many people, until much more recently. How long, if you look at the indigenous people of this land, how long would they survive out in nature if they're not in touch with their gut feelings? So that connection to the self is essential. Terrific. But what happens if the child finds or gets the message that if you have authentic feelings, you're not acceptable to the parents? We don't do anger in this house. Now everybody says I quote him out of context. I'm not quoting him out of context. Jordan Peterson, a Canadian psychologist, writes in his book, 12 Roots for Life, that an angry child should be made to sit by themselves till they come back to normal. Anger is not normal, you see, in a 2-year-old. I'm telling you, if you're the parent of a 2-year-old, if you don't make them angry, you're not doing your job. Because they want to crawl out into the winter with no clothes on. No, you don't. It's not a democracy. You don't get to vote on that. They want a cookie before dinner. No, you don't. So what do you do when you get frustrated? If you're like me, you might throw a tantrum. So does the 2-year-old. But then you can't be with me. Another child has more commonly, if the parents are stressed, the child picks up on that. Like I told you before, the child will suppress themselves not to add to the parent's stress. Will even take responsibility for the parent's stress. So they push down their own needs and their own feelings. So now there's a choice the child has to make. The child has to make, not a conscious choice. This is not deliberate. I can have authenticity or I can have attachment, but I can't have both. Now what? Guess what's going to get sacrificed? The authenticity, the connection to ourselves. And that's why you all put your hand up on the gut feeling question. That's what happened to you. And it's not because your parents didn't love you. Because they couldn't see you. They couldn't hear you. They couldn't connect with you on a deep level. Because the children have 4 needs. One is for that strong attachment relationship, absolutely secure and stable, where they're welcomed, celebrated, not for what they do, but for who they are. Number 1. Number 2, rest. In other words, they don't have to work to make their relationship work. They don't have to be successful, good, pretty, cute, compliant, obedient, anything. They can just rest, knowing that they're going to be loved, accepted, and understood no matter what. That's a need of the child for healthy development. The third need is to be able to experience and express and have understood and validated all our emotions. Now, we're wired for emotion. We're wired for love. We're wired for anger. We're wired for fear. We're wired for grief, for playfulness, for curiosity. And the child needs to be able to experience all that, express it, and have the parents validate it, understand it. Now, a lot of parents are too stressed, too traumatized themselves to be able to provide those conditions to their kids. The fourth condition is free, spontaneous play out in nature. Now, how many kids still have free, spontaneous play out in nature? They play with toys, mechanical, plastic toys, cell phones. I could go on. I could give you a whole lecture just on the harm of digital media on the developing brain of the child. So when I talk about the toxicity of this culture, what I'm talking about, it doesn't provide families and children the necessary conditions for healthy development. Because let me tell you, you can traumatize people in 2 ways. You can hurt them, do bad things to them, children. So there's the famous adverse childhood experiences studies, the ACE studies. Adverse childhood experiences are physical, sexual, emotional abuse, violence in the family, a parent dying, a parent being jailed, a parent being addicted, a parent being mentally ill, a rancorous divorce, neglect. You do that to kids, you can predict they're going to have more chance for addiction. And I'll finish this talk in a moment with a word about addiction. More mental health conditions, more physical illness, and so on. You can show the links between all that early childhood adversity and adult pathology. But you can also hurt kids not by doing bad things to them that you shouldn't have, but by not doing the good things that you should have. And not because you don't love them, but because you limited yourself by all the factors that I talked about. And this is how trauma gets passed on multi-generationally. Now, a final word about addiction. In Canada's jails, there's a scandal. The scandal is that 50% of the women in Canada's jail are Indigenous. They make up 5 or 6% of the population. 30-40% of the men in jail are Indigenous. Why? Often, I was in, I'll show you this bracelet that I'm wearing. I never thought I'd ever wear a bracelet. It was given to me 2 months ago up in Haida Gwaii, where I gave a workshop, a trauma workshop for the Haida people. A 75-year-old woman came up in tears towards the end of the workshop, wanted to work with me. She told me that she'd forgotten her Haida language. She used to speak it fluently until she was 5 years old. And then she forgot it. I said, well, that must have scared you. She said, first day I went to school, I spoke my tribal language. They took a stick and they beat me. I know other indigenous people who, when they spoke their language in the residential schools, this is when I was a teenager. I had no idea this was going on in this country. A kid would speak their own language in the school, they'd have a pin stuck in their tongue. Here in British Columbia. And then we wonder why indigenous people have high rates of diabetes and autoimmune disease and suicide and addiction because of all the trauma. Now what is it? Now this woman with the pin in her tongue, she was an alcoholic by the time she was 9 years old. Let me finish with 3 minutes on addiction, then I'll take questions. I'll define addiction as any behavior in which you find temporary relief or pleasure, and therefore you crave it, but then it causes negative consequences, and you can't give it up despite the negative consequences. So pleasure, craving, relief in the short term, harm in the long term, inability to give it up. I said any behavior. I didn't say drugs. It could include drugs, for sure. Alcohol, cocaine, crystal meth, cigarettes, caffeine, fentanyl. It could also be work, as I've said, gambling, shopping, pornography, eating, bulimia, extreme sports, cell phones, internet games. According to that definition, let me ask you, how many of you would acknowledge that at some time or another in your life you had some kind of an addiction? Just raise your hands. Again, most people. Now, if I asked you, I'm not going to right now, just for sake of time, not what was wrong with the addiction, but what was right about it. You know what you tell me? What people tell me all over the world? Stress relief. It numbed me out. Temporary escape. A sense of control. A sense of belonging. I felt more alive. Well, all these things, pain relief, numbing out. When do you have to be numbed out? When you go to the dentist. When it's going to hurt. That's why you have to numb out. How come on God's green earth, with everything that's available to us, you didn't feel alive? Something happened. You got disconnected from yourself. These are all forms of emotional pain. And my mantra is, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. And if you want to understand why people are in pain, don't look at their genes or their brains, for God's sakes. Look at their lives. In the downtown east side work for 12 years, there wasn't a single female patient who had not been sexually abused as a child. And these are not just my findings, these are statistics from all over the place. So, where am I coming to? It's all one, you see. Our minds and bodies are one. And they're one with the society that we live in, and the relationships that we have, and how we treat each other, and how we think about ourselves as human beings, how we like ourselves and don't like ourselves, how much trust we have in the world or how much fear we have in the world, how much pain we carry. These are all determined by what happens to us in this life. We don't have to stay unconscious puppets. Some of you might remember the story of Pinocchio. Some of you, how many do? Pinocchio? Oh, good, yeah. Well, wonderful children's story. And Pinocchio is a puppet, of course, who wants to become a real boy. And until he becomes a real boy, he does some pretty stupid things. And when he becomes a real boy, he looks at his puppet self and he says, I was so foolish when I was a puppet. Well, we're all foolish when we're puppets. We're all foolish when we're pulled by the unconscious, which is programmed by our early childhood experience beginning in the womb. The point is we can get liberated from that. We can heal. Trauma fundamentally is a disconnection from the self. We can recover. What does, including from addiction. What does the word recovery mean? What does it mean to recover something? It means to find it. When you ask people, what did you find when you recovered? They say, I found myself. Which takes me back to the first thing I said to you about the regret of dying people. They regret that they weren't themselves. The word stress was coined here in Canada by another Hungarian. I hate to tell you, but we're just geniuses, okay? This is Dr. Hans Janos Selye. He was a very famous physician and researcher, not as well remembered as he should be, but he's the one that did the work on stress in the laboratory in the 1920s in Montreal. And he's the one that coined the word stress the way we use it today. He's the one that made the word stress, brought it into the popular language. And he said that most of our tensions and frustrations stem from compulsive needs to act the role of someone we are not. So this thing of trying to fit in with what other people expect from you, trying to please other people, pushing down your own emotions, disconnecting from yourself. We were programmed into it in childhood, and we live in a society that keeps demanding it. And I'm telling you, the way to health is to recover that self, to reconnect to it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Now, we have time for some questions. So there are people with mics. I think they'll come around to you if you raise your hand if you have a question.
Yes, so Dr. Mate, there's some folks that are going to wander through the crowds. I think we have about 30 minutes.
Sorry?
Would you like to have some water?
We have 30 minutes, you said?
Yeah, we have 30 minutes.
Okay, 30 minutes for questions.
Yeah,
Good.
30 minutes of questions. Rapid fire.
That's fine, yeah.
You ready for it?
Yeah.
So the more concise everyone is, the more questions Dr. Mate can answer. Deal? So you'll see some folks wandering through the bottom section here. Sorry, balcony. Down here, we've got some folks with microphones. Raise your hands and state your seat. And some of our lovely volunteers will be by with the microphone for questions for Dr. Mate. I see one back here.
Okay, just wave your hand. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Dr. Mate.
Hi.
So my question is, what can you speak to when a lot of recovery programs are fully abstinence-based? What can you say to including psychedelic-assisted therapy in someone's recovery plan? What are the kinds of things an individual should consider before looking into that? Should it be on the table? What kind of risk is involved there?
Did you say psychedelic-assisted therapy? Yeah. Well, look, there's a much broader question, which is embedded in your question. Most addiction treatment facilities don't deal with trauma. They don't deal with causes, they deal with effects. So they're trying to change the behavior, but the behavior is only a symptom. Symptom of what? Emotional pain based on early experience and desperation. Until you deal with that, you're just dealing with the surface. So addiction programs need to finally get the message that it's about trauma. It's about people being wounded. And I'm telling you, I don't go anywhere in the world, literally. I'm fortunate to have lived long enough to see this. I don't go anywhere in the world without people in the streets coming up to me thanking me. Because I helped them to understand that their addiction wasn't a fault, a moral failure, or character weakness. It was a response to trauma, and they can heal that. It happened here. already in Kelowna. So, and I also know that many programs have taken on a trauma-based view, not sufficiently. Again, as I said, the average medical doctor doesn't get a single lecture on trauma. I mean, it's unbelievable. So, it's a much larger issue than just psychedelics. Now, to answer specifically about psychedelics, they can be helpful. They're not magic pills. To the extent that they help, it's not because they change your brain. It's not like you're taking a drug to change your brain. It's not like taking Prozac for depression, which changes the chemistry of your brain. The psychedelics don't do that. They only last in the system for a few hours. What they do is they give you a glimpse of your unconscious, all the pain, the fear that you've been running away from. And that might even help you recall where you developed that pain and that fear. But they help you do it with the consciousness of an adult. So you get a glimpse of your childhood emotional states, but as a conscious adult. Now, this depends on really good help being available. So I believe they do have an important role to play, potentially. They're not for everybody. Some people who shouldn't take them at all. But well chosen in a safe environment with well-trained facilitators, I've seen them do wonderful things for people with addictions. In the context of a much longer recovery and healing program, not as a standalone thing. Okay?
Hello, Dr. Mate.
Yeah, so can you just show me where you are?
Oh, I'm right here.
Okay, hi.
Hello, it's
Hi.
a pleasure. I guess this hits really close to home. I used to work at the Youth Recovery House in Kelowna.
Yeah.
And our youth really resonated with your work. We held a lot of workshops on trauma and therapy, and they loved your chapters, they loved your TED Talks. And so first of all, I just wanted to say that there's so much happening behind closed doors that you might not be seeing, and people enjoying your work. So I just
I'm
want to
almost
say
so glad to hear that. Thank you.
thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
The second thing I wanted to really ask you about is, we talk about people and their mental health and addiction, and I moved on from that job. I'm now doing my master's and PhD in clinical psychology, and there's so many mental health professionals out there that have all this training and that know some of what you're talking about. And you're talking about also physicians having their set of training and how it's different. And we can look to other countries like New Zealand, and they have integrated care. So they have primary health care providers with mental health professionals alongside. And yet BC doesn't have that. And I look at the statistics and I look around the room and I see all these people responding to your wonderful questions, and so much of us have dealt with mental health in our families, in our communities, and addiction. Over 50% of people that go to their primary care providers, such as a physician or a nurse practitioner in BC, have an underlying mental health issue. And that's huge. And just as you've alluded to...
Okay, but look, I'll ask you to come to your question, okay?
Yeah, just as you've alluded to, you didn't get that training in medical school. And so my question to you is, what do you think about integrating mental health professionals into primary healthcare centers? And why is BC lacking behind, whereas other countries acknowledge your teachings and are building upon that?
Well, first of all, I don't have to really elaborate on your statement, because I absolutely agree with it. You know, the need for integration and interprofessional collaboration and a multifaceted approach, absolutely. Look, I don't know why BC, or Canada in general, or the United States in general, or England in general. You know, a lot of countries are lacking that kind of integration. Again, I said that the Western mind splits things into part, things that can't be separated. We live in a Western mindset, really a colonial mindset. You know, and that's just, now, I can tell you that all the invitations I get to speak around the world, I never get one from my home university, UBC. I'm not taking it personally, but actually this year I did. I did give a talk for the Alumni Association a couple of weeks ago. I've been asked to give grand rounds at Children's Hospital in a couple of weeks. The BCMA has asked me to write an article on trauma. Well, that's amazing. I've only been yelling about it for the last quarter century. But so I'm saying there's slight shifts, but there's tremendous institutional inertia. There's tremendous institutional inertia. And generally, the people that make it into governing or decisive positions in institutions are the ones least likely to look at this stuff. That's just how it works. How to shift it, just keep plugging away.
Question from the back here.
Yeah?
Hello.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, wherever.
I'm on the other side.
Oh, the other side. Okay,
Hello.
yeah, hi.
Hi, doctor.
Hi.
I wanted to ask a question regarding kind of how we contextualize this within world events. I think we're all seeing a lot of traumatizing content from parts of the world that are going through very difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
The ones I'm thinking about as a Palestinian are Gaza and Palestine specifically.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing is a lot of mental health practitioners champion this idea that the best way for us collectively to move through this is to look away and guard our own selves and our discomfort.
Yeah.
What do you think about that in terms of a way of taking care of ourselves, but also a way, or like what responsibilities do we still have towards other people while shielding ourselves from things like that?
Okay. Well, look, that's everybody's individual call. If your simple goal is to shield yourself, protect yourself, don't look at it and don't engage with what's going on. But I'm telling you, as a Jew, I grew up with this. When I was 11 years or so, I really found out about the Holocaust. For years, my head was spinning every day with the question, how could this have happened? How could the world could have let this happen? I'm seeing now how the world can let it happen. Parents are picking their kids' bones out of the rubble, and the world is ignoring it, and letting it happen. And our politicians are even cheering it on. It sickens me. So we can have a decision about should we just look after ourselves. I don't blame anybody who comes to that decision. That is too painful, it's too harrowing, it's just too terrible to pay attention to. I can understand that. But are you going to be a complete human being if you do that? And what does it mean to be a complete human being? So I decided, for myself at least, that no, I'm not going to look away, and I'm not going to stay silent. And I totally understand the trauma of my own people. I totally understand the trauma of my own people that potentiated this situation. We took our trauma from Europe and we imposed it on the Palestinians, is what we did, in an effort to save ourselves. So as one traumatized people has been traumatizing another people now for the last 80 years, as you know. That's how I see it. And so trauma has a lot to do with what's going on. I'm not excusing anybody. I'm not excusing Jews acting out of trauma to traumatize somebody else, to save themselves, which is what they did. I'm not excusing what happened on October the 7th as a response to the trauma no, these acts are all inexcusable. But we have to understand the context. And just to answer your personal question, it's a choice for all of us. It's a choice for all of us. And when Justin Trudeau said that, we support Israel because we have the same values, yes, you do. You both were established on indigenous land by suppressing the indigenous population. And we have to come to terms with that. It's not a question of Canada folding up our tents and going back to Europe or Asia, wherever we came from. We're not going to do that. Nor will the Jewish population of Israel go away back to Europe or wherever, they might have to come from. But if we want peace looking forward in this country, we have to really look our history in the face and realize what we've done here. When I say we, I don't mean as individuals. I mean as a culture. Are we happy with the fact that Indigenous people die 20 years younger than the rest of us? That 50% of the women in jail are we happy with that? Is that okay? Are there some reasons for that maybe we could understand and look at and rectify? Is it okay that Indigenous nations don't have potable water in 21st century Canada? Is that okay? And I'm saying the same thing needs to apply in the Middle East. Not to undo history, but to look it in the face. And again, each of us individually has to decide, yes, we want our safety, we want our comfort, we have to look after ourselves, and sometimes we do have to disengage. But overall, what will make us a complete human being that when we look back on our lives, we'll be happy with? For my own part, it's not disassociating from reality. Okay?
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I'm over here.
Hi.
It's really nice to meet you. I've been a big fan for a really long time. My name's Stephanie. I'm a third-year biochemistry student at UBC here, and I want to be a physician largely because of your work. And to preface my question, I just want to say that you are inspiring a generation of physicians who will not be silent.
I'm so glad to hear that. Just don't argue with your teachers very much.
Oh no, don't worry, I do that plenty. But
Okay.
my honors thesis is I'm designing a project about how we can link trauma and addiction education to biochemistry and present that to biochemistry students. And I'm going to teach it as a module for one of our classes.
Okay.
So that'll happen in the next few years, so that's exciting. But
Yeah.
my question was, what advice do you have for future physicians, particularly because I know it is a very taxing role, and I do identify with a lot of what you're saying about, being a workaholic and the need to be wanted.
Yeah. So look, there's been a study on medical. I cite this in this book. There's something called. Do you know what telomeres are?
Yes.
Okay. So telomeres, for those that don't know, are chromosomal or DNA structures at the end of our chromosomes. They're made up of DNA, but they're like, see these shoelaces? There's a glue at the end to keep the threads from unraveling. So the telomeres are at the end of our chromosomes to keep them from unraveling. And we're born with a certain number of units of them, maybe 10,000, and by the time we die, there's 4,000. So they fray, they erode with age and with stress. They looked at medical students, medical residents, and they found that over a year, their telomeres shortened more than other people their age. In other words, they got older faster. So you got to look after yourself. And unfortunately, well, it's changing, I think, in a positive sense. But physicians, anybody going to the health professions, psychologists, nurses, they should be guided to work on their own emotional stuff. Because the more you do, the more present and understanding you'll be with your clients, but also the better able you'll be to take care of yourself. So I say to you, take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Do what you can. Number one, doing the emotional work as well. Number one. Number two, you're going to have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get your degree.
100%.
You might as well accept that.
Yeah.
That's how it is, And when you do, you'll find your own path. That's what I can tell you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello?
Hi?
Oh, no, sorry, other side. No, over there. Hi, I'm in orange.
Okay, yeah, okay, hi.
My question is a little bit different than
I'm
everybody
sorry,
else's.
people are waving their hands. Stand up, would you, who are asking the question?
Yes, I am standing up. I'm
Over
right
to
You
your
are
left,
standing up.
Dr. Mate. Over here. Over in the orange.
Okay, yeah, okay,
It's
go.
really bright up here.
Thank you.
I'm dealing with a high conflict.
Let me go to the mic here. Okay, start again, yeah?
I'm dealing with a high conflict parent who suffers from schizophrenia.
Yeah.
We have a young child.
A parent-
and
a parent- a parent
A
is-
parent, yes, my ex. And I'm just wondering, for what she has already experienced in her young life, is it healthy to continue? Yes, it's her father, but because of the volatile issues and schizophrenia that he does suffer from, what are things I need to be looking out for her development wise?
So I just want to make sure I get it. Are you saying that your father's child, your
Yes.
child's father is schizophrenic?
Yeah.
Are you still together?
No, but he's
You're
still
not.
in
Okay.
her life.
So the question is how to protect your child?
Yeah, like obviously that's her dad. I want them to have a relationship, but it's definitely not healthy.
Yeah.
And things to look out for her. I don't
How old is your child?
She's 2.
2.
Yeah.
Does she spend time with the dad?
Yes.
In your presence or on own?
In my house, yes.
Okay. Is that because you want that to happen, or he wants it to happen, or who's making?
It's both.
You
but
both want it to happen.
yeah, they need to be supervised visits, so like he can't be alone with
Okay.
her.
Well, look, the child needs to feel absolute security, and you can provide that. No, look, let me tell you something. You might not be cheered up by this, but your husband's or your child's father's schizophrenia, psychosis is rooted in trauma.
Yeah,
Okay?
for sure.
Number 1. Number 2, we always marry somebody at the same level of trauma that we're at. So you wouldn't have been with this man had you not been traumatized yourself. Are you with me?
I guess, yeah.
Okay. So the best thing you can do for your child is to work on your own stuff.
Yes, and it's definitely happening.
So that you can, because the more you do, the more present you'll be able to be for her, and the more protective you will be of any negative influences that might enter from any other source. So the most important thing you can do is, I really suggest you read a couple of my books, the Hold On to Your Kids, which is a parenting book, and perhaps The Myth of Normal as well. Look after yourself, do your own healing, and absolutely provide that attachment relationship for the child where they feel safe and they can express their emotions. And tune into her. And if after a while you find that these visits are more upsetting for her than calming, you might want to reconsider the situation. Ideally, you'll be able to have the father in the child's life, schizophrenia or not. But you need to be vigilant, number 1. Not suspicious, but vigilant. And provide that safe environment coming from your own self-awareness that your child needs. And then she'll be well protected. Okay? Right, thank you.
All right. And Dr. Mate, I think we have time. We have time for 2 more questions, and I do see that there's a mic here at the back on the right-hand side, waving. Yeah, we see you waving back there. And then we have one over here. So we'll just take those last 2 questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Why, Gabor Mate, why lemon kitchkala? Why kusuneho? Dale quantis noxilo. Hinjay squist cano chanitza. Kisukana kainu. A hain tumhula, haisen tlachpeten, limlum kuchkich. I'm really grateful my little brother made it here tonight. I welcome you in my territory. My elders told me when I was a young boy, that was about 70 years ago, that our little brother is going to wake up and he's going to look at himself and he's going to look at me. This is what I see going on here, Gabor. Thank you. I have a question that's been eating me. for 23 years.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time with it. My grandparents are all gone. Year 2000, I'll go back to there. Me and my boys, we got back from Saskatchewan on a ride for world peace with our relative Ernest Sundown and Chief Orville Luckenhorst, caretaker to Calf Pipe. We were instructed by my elders from our eastern western boundary that somebody needs to guide these pipes through our territory. So I did that.
Mm-hmm.
Me and my family. I used to have 8 children. We got back from Saskatchewan, a load of horses on. I'm ready to dump them off, and I had heard one guy tell me, we're going to burn that place down. December 6th, year 2000, by 4 o'clock in the morning, the little shack I built burned down. I lost 3 of my oldest boys there. After that, I got death threats from my family because of my knowledge of language and culture. A little background what I am. My parents' dad, he never went there.
Now, respectfully, I'm going to ask you to stop for a moment. My brother, thank you for speaking. I'm going to ask you to give me your question, okay?
I need help to help my people. They called on me to help them. I got a little bit of help trying to raise fundraising, do a land-based learning.
Okay. What kind of help are you looking for?
Trauma healing. We have in our language for that word trauma.
All right. What I'd like you to do is to give your name and contact info to the organizers of this event. I'll be in touch with you.
White Limrim. Thank you much.
You're welcome. Okay? Yeah?
Hi, good evening. Thank you for being here, and thank you for taking my last question. I'm a dentist in Kelowna, and the last year and a half, every single course that I've been to has involved playing video clips of your talks, and people are really hearing and listening to you in particular to do with trauma. We're also learning a lot about the connection of trauma, whether it's emotional or physical, and how it's held in fascia.
Let me stop you for a minute. These are all, these are all crowns, you know?
Yeah.
I ground my teeth down to the pulp. I was grinding my teeth at night all my life. That had to do with trauma.
It totally does.
A lot of the work that you do has to do with trauma.
100%.
But go on, yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because the work that we're doing, we have our entire staff here tonight, and we're working, our mentors have become ENT surgeons, speech language pathologists.
Yeah.
You know, people who are working to understand the connection between oral manifestations and trauma, how we breathe, how we sleep, and in particular how we swallow. And your story about the woman with the pin in her tongue was really hard to handle when you understand the tongue as an organ that is connected to the deep frontal plane of fascia. And what that's doing to us in our diaphragms and in our connectedness to our bodies. And I guess I wonder, I haven't heard it from you, your work. I've heard you quoted at all these courses. I've heard, we're shown embryological videos to show that the heart and the tongue and the brain as rhythm centers are forming at the same time. Are you seeing trauma held in fascia? Are you working at all with groups who are doing fascia release?
Well, look, first of all, a lot of autoimmune disease has to do with trauma held in fascia or connective tissue. Fibromyalgia is a connection, is a condition that's purely trauma held in fascia. Chronic pain. You know, people go to the doctor and they have all this pain and nobody can explain it. It was trauma being held in the fascia.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then this is not even controversial.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. It's not that I'm asking you in that I'm asking what your perspective is, not that I haven't heard you say it.
Yeah,
But,
well,
yeah.
you know what? What's interesting is that physiotherapists and body workers, massage therapists, they get this because they work with the body and they work with the tensions and the tightenings and the blockages.
I'm glad you know that your ground teeth are connected
Absolutely,
to fascia
yeah.
and trauma.
Absolutely,
That's awesome.
yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
She's much prettier in real life.